I'm trying to eat better. I was out to lunch with a friend, and I got a chicken sandwich. And the waitress said to me, "Oh, you're getting a chicken sandwich." Well, that comes with a choice of either salad or fries. Those were the choices. Salad or fries, the two most different foods in the universe. That's like saying, what kind of day do you want to have? Do you want to be active and go to the bathroom or stuff? Or do you want to lay on the floor moaning? Oh, you're getting a chicken sandwich? Well, with that, you can either go for a jog or smoke crack cocaine. Well, if I got a plate of crack for the table, would you have some? You'd have crack if I got a plate of crack? Yeah, okay, we'll take an order of crack. Sometimes, when people order fries, they act like it's a little adventure. They'll be like, should we get a plate of fries for the table? Should we do it? Should we share some fries? They gotta make sure that everyone's on board with it. It's like, if I get fries, you'll have a couple, right? If I get fries for the table, I know you'll have fries if I get fries. Should we do it? Yeah, let's be bad. Come on, let's do it. All right, we're gonna take a plate of fries. I'm trying.
Good morning. It's Friday, Police Craft Friday, May 31st, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have the patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 strategies of war, and police craft. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now Stuart Varney with the headlines.
I want to thank this fantastic panel, Kellyanne Conway and Kevin O'Leary. Please come back soon. Have a great weekend, everybody. Varney and Company picks it up. Stu, take it away.
Good morning, Maria. Good morning, everyone. The verdicts are in. The reaction is furious. Republicans angry at what they see as judicial corruption. Democrats celebrating. They think they've won. No statement yet from the president. He will be hosting the Kansas City Chiefs at the White House before heading back to the beach later on today. No rest for Trump. He will hold a press conference at 11 Eastern. We will take it. This is a world of political turmoil. The Trump campaign has brought in millions of dollars in the last few hours. The fundraising website briefly crashed. Some questions here. How will voters react to the guilty verdicts? Could Trump actually be sentenced to jail? Will the verdicts be thrown out on appeal? And if so, when? No answers yet. But we can tell you the reaction of the financial markets. In a word, it's muted response to the verdicts, but it's very positive on the latest inflation numbers that came out around 8:30 Eastern this morning. The index that the Fed pays attention to shows a 2.7% inflation rate over the last year. The verdicts came down after the market closed. Futures at first plunged, but now the Dow has recovered to the upside, a gain of 70 points at the opening bell, up about 40 or 50 for the Nasdaq. Same story with the other markets. A muted reaction to the verdicts, but a positive reaction to the inflation news. The 10-year Treasury yield coming all the way down to 4.51%. The 2-year still well below 5%. In fact, it's down to 4.91%. Bitcoin, not much change, 68,600. Oil still below $80 a barrel, 78.33. Gas down 1 cent, 3.55 is the national average for regular. Diesel no change at 3.87. All right, politics. A Marist poll shows 15% would be more likely to vote for Trump if he's found guilty, more likely if he's guilty. 17% say they're less likely to vote for him. The poll, however, was taken before the verdicts came down. On the show today, this is going to be must-see TV, Trump's press conference at 11 Eastern. There will be questions, and he will no doubt answer them all, as he usually does. You will see it all on this Friday, May 31st, 2024. Varney and Company is about to begin.
Thank you. So thank you, bloody tourist Stuart Varney. So listen, when you're listening to these people give you the news, the basic thing that you're supposed to be getting from the news is who, what, where, when, why, and how. The 5 W's and how. So if you're not getting any one or several of those things, they're not doing their job. And Stuart Varney isn't doing his job. He gets paid hefty money, millions, tens of millions of dollars a year to sit in front of this camera and do a job. And the job we expect him to do is to provide us with adequate information so that we can be good citizens. And he fails to do that. He did it again here. One of the things, the big failures that he is doing here is talking about the markets, as though the markets are autonomous and that they move themselves. Oh, look, the markets went up. The markets went down. The markets went sideways. No, they didn't. They were moved. John F. Kennedy said it best. Things don't just happen. They're made to happen. So that's one of the things that you need to ask, and I need to ask, and Stuart Varney needs to ask, who did it? When you're hearing markets, you need to think banks. The market movers are the banks, the investment banks, Merrill Lynch and all Schwab and all those big banks. They move, they buy tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of shares of this or that or the other thing at any given time, and that's what moves the market. So if he says, well, the market is muted, the banks are muted, or they're not terribly bullish on stocks, on equities. So where's the money going? That's the next question, because if stocks are going up, it usually means that this because the banks are taking money out of somewhere else, maybe out of securities. They're taking it out of treasury bills and putting it into the stock market, putting it into equities. Or if the stock market is down, that means the banks are taking money out of the stock market and putting it somewhere else. But where else? And this is, again, Stuart Varney doesn't bother to explain it. Nobody else really does either. But he doesn't bother to explain that this is the way the markets move. Also, he doesn't bother to explain that there's more than just 3 markets. There's more than just the Dow 30. There's more than the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ. There's dozens of markets. And he ignores 90% of them. There are markets, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, in which you have pork bellies and wheat and things like that are being traded. That's a market. The currency markets, that's a market. Treasuries, that's a market. So we're being misled here. And then these same fools are going to complain about low information voters, single issue voters, and wonder why that is. And then they're going to come up with these wild-ass theories as to why it is the American voter is uninformed, when in reality, these buttholes should be looking in the mirror. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Hollywood.
You were in an acting class with Marilyn Monroe.
It's a very happy time. I'm happy to be back.
Was that true?
Yes, it's true. I liked her because she was so real and sweet and kind. I walked her from 58th Street to the actor's studio. She didn't say much, but she didn't have to. And walking along, and I said, this is amazing, Marilyn, because nobody's, falling apart here because you're walking along.
People weren't recognizing her?
No, they didn't recognize her. I said, wow, how come they don't jump up and down? And she said, oh, do you want to see her? I went, sure. And so all she did was just to throw her shoulders back, I tried that all the time. Nothing happened. Like that. And she started walking along within 20 feet. It was surrounded by about 40 people.
Grew up a huge Johnny Carson fan.
Burt Reynolds.
You may have been the best guest of all time.
What do you think made your chemistry special?
I was in love with him. I felt that we had a connection somehow. I don't know why. We just did. I couldn't believe it. And I'd heard all these stories, Don't touch the pencil. Be careful when he reaches over. And when you...
Yes.
Don't drink out of the cup that he...
Right.
I just didn't give a damn about all that.
Yeah.
And we had a good time. We always had fun.
I've heard a story, I don't know if it's true, that Johnny Carson had you on your first appearance on The Tonight Show, and he had such a good time, he said, that night, come back tomorrow. Is that right?
That's true, yes.
That's unbelievable.
Norman Lear found immense joy in discovering the perfect actor for Archie Bunker in All in the Family. O'Connor's demeanor, with its precise blend of crotchety and stubborn energy, made him ideal for the role. The sole issue arose from his tendency to be challenging to collaborate with. Insisting on absolute control over Archie's actions and dialogue, the actor swiftly took charge, completely rewriting the pilot episode within just 2 days of joining the project. He transcribed the entire script in pencil and performed all roles on recording. In a 1999 interview with the Television Academy Foundation, he bluntly criticized the original script, indicating readiness to step aside if his revisions weren't accepted. They acquiesced his demands to retain him, marking the beginning of a pattern of occasional anger and demands. Norman acknowledges numerous challenging moments with the actor, but holds him in high regard nonetheless. After Carroll's untimely passing in 2001, he paid a visit to his widow, Nancy. A birthday letter he had penned, conveying gratitude and respect, remained on the actor's desk right where he had placed it. In 1994, during Reynolds and Anderson's divorce proceedings, Reynolds was compelled by the court to disclose his financial situation. He revealed debts exceeding $11 million, while his assets amounted to only $6 million, leaving a significant shortfall. It was discovered that Reynolds owed more money than he initially knew. The IRS, his bank former manager, and the Creative Artists Agency all demanded payments from him. Further investigation revealed that Reynolds owed over $100,000 to his manufacturer. After his divorce was finalized, Reynolds experienced a bit of a career resurgence, starring in films like Striptease and Boogie Nights, which even earned him an Oscar nomination. However, this comeback was relatively short-lived, and his career eventually stagnated once again. Continuing with financial troubles throughout his life, Reynolds lost one of his estates after missing several payments and was labeled a California tax delinquent. Despite not being completely broke during the last decade of his life, he did not accumulate nearly as much wealth as expected given his former A-list status.
I'm the guy who didn't want Jack an easy rider. All right? You're looking at the schmuck right here. Okay.
You didn't get into like a second-rate hotel. A second-rate motel, you dig?
Dennis and I had an actor in mind that we had been in collaboration with way early in the process. And when it came time to principal photography, the man wanted $4,500. And I didn't have $4,500. And I said to this fellow, everybody's getting scale but me. And he said, well, what are you getting? I said, nothing. And Jack, who was willing to do a part for Scale, agreed to work for us. And Scale at that time was $392 a week. I'll tell you one thing, mister. It was the best $392 I ever spent.
And that was Hollywood. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the patriotic shorts.
This guy made the mistake. He knew there was something, but he didn't know what the hell it was, the German. And he turned around, and he wasn't 75 feet from me. Pulled the trigger. I know I killed that man, but, he just folded. But, basically, people will ask you, how many men did you kill? You don't know. You couldn't possibly know what the hell you're doing when you're in a firefight.
Why did Soviet tankers shoot their lieutenant colonel? Spring 1942. The vast Russian expanses turned into a sea of melted snow. A column of Soviet tanks was stuck on a washed-out highway. The situation was complicated by the approaching enemy. An excited lieutenant colonel of communications drove up to the tankers. He was carrying an urgent report to the headquarters and demanded to release the road immediately. But the commander of the lead tank in the column, drowning in mud, refused to obey. Lieutenant colonel's nerves could not stand it. He pulled out a gun and threatened to use it. Seeing that the tanker did not react, the liaison officer fired in anger, killing the tank commander. He then ran to his vehicle. Witnesses to the tragedy regarded the lieutenant colonel's actions as sabotage by the enemy. Tankers of the angry column opened a barrage of fire on the car of the communications officer. The lieutenant colonel and his driver were killed.
I know that Japanese sniper was waiting for me again. About 10 minutes after, we're sitting there shooting the breeze, just talking. He fell back. He got shot in the forehead. It went through his helmet. His helmet flew up and landed down by my feet. We were stunned. Not that he got hit, but I was just up there. He knew I was going to go back up there. He knew that. And I looked at that, and I looked down in that helmet, and there was a beautiful girl sitting in a chair, and on her lap was a beautiful baby. When I saw that, I lost it. Sad. I just lost it. I got up and threw everything off, and I cursed Iwo Jima. I cursed the Marine Corps. And the worst thing I did is I cursed God because he let that kid take my place. I didn't understand.
Did you know that during the filming of The Night of the Generals, a rather amusing yet telling incident occurred involving the actor Omar Sharif? It was in the midst of a particularly cold winter in Warsaw, Poland, where the cast and crew were on location. Omar decided to step away from the set for a short break and entered a small cafe with the intention of warming himself with a hot beverage. However, he had not changed out of his costume, which was a German officer's uniform from World War II. The customers inside the cafe were immediately taken aback by his appearance, as the sight of the uniform brought back memories of a war that had deeply affected their lives. Omar tried to reassure everyone by explaining that he was an actor in the midst of shooting a film and that the uniform was merely a costume. He emphasized that the war had indeed been over for almost 22 years. Despite his explanations, the cafe staff were hesitant to serve him. Did you know that in the movie Pearl Harbor, despite not being portrayed in the film, it is worth noting that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was actually against a war with the United States. His education at Harvard, extensive travels throughout the U.S., and interactions with Americans had made him well aware of America's vast industrial capabilities, which were unparalleled by any other nation. When he received orders to prepare for war with the U.S., he believed that the best strategy would be to eliminate the Pacific Fleet and then use the threat of further hostilities to negotiate a peace. Unfortunately, Yamamoto recognized that Japan's failure to issue an ultimatum before the attack meant that there would be no possibility of a negotiated settlement. He predicted that Japan would initially have the upper hand for about a year, but their ultimate defeat was inevitable due to the strong outrage and retaliation.
And that was the Patriotic Shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little motivation.
Working on yourself, talking to yourself. That's so very important. Overcoming the negative conversation, that inner dialogue that's going on all the time. Even when you don't want it to be there. You can't stop yourself right now from thinking. You can't do it. It's going on. And so learning how to empower yourself, part of doing that is standing up to yourself. You got to stand up inside yourself sometimes and say, shut up. I was going to give a presentation, and this voice inside of me saying, you can't do this. You don't have everything it takes. Shut up. I'm behind on my bills, and you're telling me what I can't do. I have got to do it. You'll get scared sometimes. Your mind will go blank on you. Some people you will allow to unnerve you, and you wonder, what's wrong with me? I'm not crazy. That's why you've got to learn to make a conscious, deliberate, determined effort to stand up inside yourself. Working on yourself, watching that inner dialogue, it will determine the quality of your life.
I don't know what that dream is that you have. I don't care how far-fetched it might appear to be. I don't care how disappointing it might have been as you've been working toward that dream. But here's what I know, that dream that you're holding in your mind, that it's possible. See, sometimes we can't say, I can do that. But what we can say, that it's possible.
If you want to become successful in life, young man, he said, number one, you got to change your mindset. He said, you don't get in life what you want, you get in life what you are. Number two, practice OQP, only quality people. And the third thing he said, develop your communication skills, because once you open your mouth, you tell the world who you are.
I want you to be able to say something to yourself that will enable you to maintain a level of integrity with yourself. That when you say this, even when you face tremendous setbacks, it will be a benchmark to keep you in the game, to keep you moving forward and experimenting and readjusting your strategy and your plan of action, continuously looking for ways to win. So what is that something? When you got an idea you want to move on, you might not have the money, you might not have the education, you might not have the support or the resources you need. What is that something that can keep us going, that will enable us to act on our dream? What's one of those keys that will begin to help us to discover the secrets to our dream? Just say to yourself every day, it's possible. Just say that every day to yourself, it's possible.
I remember I was playing a game with my 9-year-old son, John Leslie, and I beat him 10 straight games in a game called Connect 4. And finally, I said, John Leslie, I'm bored. I don't want to play you anymore. John Leslie said, no, you can't go now, Dad. I said, why? He said, it's not over until I win. That was his attitude. We sat down and we played several other games. And finally, after the 11th game, John Leslie won, and he got up and he yawned. And he said, I'm ready to go to sleep now. And I'm saying to you, what if all of us took that attitude after we face a rejection and a no, or we have a meeting and no one shows up, or somebody say, you can count on me, and they don't come through. Nobody believes in you. You've lost again and again and again. The lights are cut off, but you're still looking at your dream, reviewing it every day, and say to yourself, it's not over until I win. I choose not to be a common man. It's my right to be uncommon if I can. I seek opportunity, not security. I do not wish to be a kept citizen, humbled and dull by having the state look after me. I want to take the calculated risk, to dream and to build, to fail and to succeed. I refuse to live from hand to mouth. I prefer the challenges of life to the guaranteed existence, the thrill of fulfillment to the stale calm of utopia. I will never cower before any master, nor bend to any threat. It's my heritage to stand erect, proud and unafraid, to face the world boldly and say, this I have done. But I didn't start off like that.
And that was a little motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Daily Dad for May the 31st.
May 31st. A theory about life. In the 1930s, languishing in college and struggling to live up to the expectations of his illustrious family, a young Walker Percy wrote a letter to his uncle and adopted father, Will Percy. He probably expected to receive a lecture about his grades in reply, or to be admonished for letting the family down, or perhaps to be sent money for a tutor. But the reply surprised him, because there wasn't any of that. Instead, Will waved off the concerns, telling Walker, my whole theory about life is that glory and accomplishment are far less important than the creation of character and the individual good life. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that exactly what every stressed, self-critical, confused kid needs to hear about life? Who you are is more important than what you do. I'd rather you be good than successful. Character is more important than cash. It can be easy to lose sight of this. We all know how competitive the world is, and we see the potential our kids have. We don't want them to make the same mistakes that we do. Ultimately, these things will take care of themselves if we raise them right. The ancients knew that character was fate, and we need to remember that with our own kids. A good life, a life lived well, full of doing good, will be a successful life, and a more important one, too.
And that was The Daily Dad by Ryan Holiday from May 31st, A Theory About Life. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Bishop Robert Barron.
You know, there can be a reduction of Christianity to being morally upright. as Flannery O'Connor put it, having a heart of gold. That's what Christianity is all about. No, it's not. Because, anybody of goodwill can do morally upright things. And people of any religious background, people of no religious background, atheists can be morally upright people. Jesus didn't come simply to make us do nice things. He came to make us new creations. You cannot enter the kingdom that he's talking about unless you are born from above. You're born again. You become somebody new through water and through the Holy Spirit.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, "In this country, few people care to advocate, to defend, or even to understand capitalism. Yet fewer still wish to give up its advantages. So if they are told that capitalism is compatible with the particular controls which further their particular interests, they will go along with such programs in the comforting belief that the results will be nothing worse than a modified capitalism," unquote. And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the 33 strategies of war.
And lastly, from the wiles of war, 36 military strategies from ancient China. The state of Jin, located in modern Shanxi, grew steadily in strength by swallowing small neighbors. There were two small states, Hu and Yu, to its south. In the spring of the 19th year under King Hui of Zhou, 658 BC, Duke Xian of Jin sent for a trusted minister, Shun Shi, and declared his intention to attack Hu. "We have little chance to gain advantage," observed Shun Shi after a pause. "Hu and Yu have always been very close. When we attack one of them, the other will surely come to its rescue. Pitched 1-to-1, neither of them is our match, but the result is far from certain if we fight both of them at the same time. Surely you are not saying we have no way to cope with these two small states?" asked the Duke. Shunshi thought for a while before replying. "I have thought up a plan by which we will be able to subdue both Hu and Yu. For the first step, we should present the Duke of Yu with handsome gifts and ask him to lend us a path by which we can attack Hu." The Duke asked, "But we have just offered gifts to Hu and signed a friendly agreement with it. We can hardly make Yu believe that we want to attack Hu instead of Yu itself." "That is not so difficult to work out," replied Shunji. "We may secretly order our men on the border to make raids on Hu. When the men of Hu come to protest, we may use that as a pretext to attack them. In this way, Yu will be convinced of our professed intention." The Duke considered it a good plan. Before long, armed conflicts broke out along the Jin-Hu border to the south. Thereupon the Duke asked, "Now we have good reason to convince Yu of our intention to attack Hu. But it will not lend the path to us unless it receives a good profit in return. So what shall we use to bribe the Duke of Yu?" Shunshi replied, "Though the Duke of Yu is known to be very greedy, he will not be moved unless our gifts are extremely precious. So why not offer him fine horses from Q and jade from Chuji?" The Duke looked reluctant. "But these are the best treasures I have. I can hardly bring myself to part with them." "I am not surprised by your doubts," said Shunshi. "Nevertheless, we are bound to subdue Hu now that it has lost the shield of Yu. After Hu is conquered, Yu will not be able to survive on its own. Therefore, when you send these gifts to the Duke of Yu, you are simply consigning the jade to your external mansion and the horses to your external stable." When Shunshi was ushered into the court of Yu and presented the gifts, the Duke of Yu's eyes bulged. "The men of Hu have repeatedly worked up disturbances along our border," said Shunshi. "To protect our people from the calamity of war, we have exerted the highest restraint
and concluded a peace treaty with WHO. Nevertheless, the impudent WHO takes our restraint for weakness and is now creating new troubles by making invidious charges against us. Therefore, my lord was compelled to order a punitive expedition against WHO, and he dispatched me to ask your permission to let our troops pass through your land. This way, we can get around our border with WHO, where its defense is strong, and launch a surprise attack at its weak point. When we have defeated the men of WHO, we shall present you with splendid trophies to testify to our mutual alliance and friendship. That summer, the Jin troops attacked WHO by way of Yu. The Duke of Yu led a band of force in person to join in the expedition. They defeated the WHO army and captured Jiayang, one of WHO's 2 major cities. The Duke of Yu received his share of the booty and believed he had nothing to regret for. In autumn of the 22nd year, under King Hui of Zhou, 655 BC, the Duke of Jin again sent an envoy to borrow a path from Yu to WHO, and again the Duke of Yu gave his consent. In the 8th month, the Duke of Jin led 600 war chariots and proceeded by way of Yu to attack WHO. They laid siege to Shangyang, the capital of WHO. The city, after holding out for nearly 4 months, finally yielded. The Duke of WHO fled, and WHO as a feudal state was destroyed. On their way back, the Jin troops halted at Yu. The Duke of Yu came to welcome them, receiving the Duke of Jin into the capital. The Jin troops seized the chance to storm into the city. Taken totally off guard, the Yu army submitted with little resistance, and the Duke of Yu was taken prisoner. Duke Xian of Jin was extremely pleased when Shunxi returned to present him with the horses and jade as well as the captured Duke of Yu.
And that was the 33 Strategies of War. Chapter 27, Seem to Work for the Interest of Others. Back in a minute. Thank you. If you are a Democrat, you should be voting Republican because the Republican Party is the true party of civil rights. It always has been. It was the party of civil rights in the Civil War, and right after the Civil War, it is the party that came up with the first 3 civil rights bills, all that were killed by Democrats, by the way. So it's the Republican Party that has always been about civil rights. So if you as a Democrat are interested in civil rights, you need to vote Republican and become a Republican. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now Stuart Varney with a little bit of news and my take.
Everyone, 10 o'clock Eastern, to the money, please. We have the Dow up about 40, the Nasdaq down about 21 points. No clear trend so far this morning. The yield on the 10-year Treasury, that is coming down. You're at 4.49 right now. That should inspire some investors because you get below 4.5%. The market likes it generally. The price of oil, $77 a barrel, and Bitcoin, last time we checked, it was 68. It's still $68,000 a coin. That's the markets. And now this. You may dislike Donald Trump. You may oppose his policies. You may think his behavior obnoxious. But to bring him to a criminal trial for falsifying business expenses many years ago shows the depths to which New York's legal system has sunk. This was an entirely political trial. It was organized by the Biden administration. It was the deliberate use of the courts to hamstring a political opponent. With 34 guilty verdicts, they think they've won. Some victory. Have they won anything by trashing our legal system? No. Trump hatred, and that's at the heart of this, doesn't deliver a fair trial. And when trials are seen to be unfair, we the people lose faith in the system. They have sacrificed our judicial system to the demands of Biden's political campaign. They think they've won. But we know that with these verdicts, America has lost. I don't think the celebrating Democrats quite realize what they've done. They think that branding Trump a convicted felon ensures a Biden win in November. That remains to be seen. We still have to go through the sentencing just a few days before the Republican convention. Can you say political interference? How are people going to feel about that? Especially if Biden's cognitive ability continues to slide. He can't think straight, but he's trying to put his opponent in jail. The verdicts have truly fired up the Republican base. They are furious. And there are going to be a lot of independents who will now lean Republican because they don't care to see America brought so low. As for the Trump haters, they'll still hate, but they will have to live with what their hatred has done. Second Aravani just getting started.
And so, again, remember what this trial is about. Two basic things. Number one, it is about the government exercising faux rights, thinking that it has rights and exercising those rights. It has a right to a conviction, it has a right to prosecution, et cetera, et cetera. Second thing this is about is getting Donald Trump to quit the race. They do the trial, and he's convicted, and all it does is create controversy, right? The way to settle everything is to get Trump to quit. Once Trump quits, it's tantamount to a confession that he's guilty of certain things. It was exactly like Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon resigned from office, and as soon as he resigned, he basically confirms for the entire country that he was a crooked president. So they want to do the same thing with Donald Trump. Put enough pressure on him to get him to the Democrats, Joe Biden, et cetera. They want to put enough pressure on him to get him to quit the race. Now, they've got a conviction, which means if they have been exonerated, then they got to come up with a plan B. But since they got a conviction, now they can use that conviction as further leverage to get Donald Trump to quit the race. Hey, you're a convicted felon. You may as well go ahead and quit the race. History is not going to regard you favorably, so you may as well quit. Why put your family through this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Even though he's going to appeal, they're going to continue because he's also got face sentencing in July, so they can hold that over his head. Why put your family through this? Resign now, and we'll make this all go away. We'll have the president, if you resign, we'll have the president go ahead and issue a pardon. Okay, that kind of thing. That's the kind of pressure they're putting on him because once he quits, it's tantamount to a confession, and a confession sticks to you like glue. And thank God that Donald Trump has the good sense not to quit. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now more on President Biden's verdict yesterday. President Biden's show trial, his Soviet-style show trial. This is a failure for the Democrats. The whole purpose, again, of this, besides the assertion of government rights, non-existent government rights, is to get Donald Trump to suspend his campaign. Quit the race. And that was what all this was about. Create this sense of intimidation, more and more pressure on him to get him to quit the race. And because once he quits, it's tantamount to a confession. And once you confess, it's a statement against interest, and it sticks to you like glue. Fortunately, Donald Trump knows better and did not resign. He did not suspend his campaign, and he is going to continue forward. So that means that this effort has backfired on the Democrats. He's getting more money than ever before. The Democrats are now describing this as yesterday as a majestic day, and it is for the United States of America, for Donald Trump and the Republican Party. For Donald Trump, because it's just going to seal his victory November 5th. And for the Republican Party and the American people, because it means now that the Democrats have opened the door that the real criminals in this country can now be prosecuted. Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, just to name four. So again, if anybody at work is telling you, oh, this was a majestic day, you tell them, yes, it was, for the American people, for Donald Trump, and for the Republican Party. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Policecraft. And so this is going to be a 40-minute chapter, but I don't have time to do the whole 40 minutes in one sitting, so we're going to do half and half. 18 minutes this week and the remainder of it next week.
21. Going forward. You risk your skin catching killers, and the juries turn them loose so they can come back and shoot at you again. If you're honest, you're poor your whole life, and in the end you wind up dying all alone on some dirty street. For what? For nothing. For a tin star. Martin, High Noon. Political commentators often don't get it when they talk about police-related issues. The curiously well-preserved television anchors on the right border on blind adoration for law enforcement and equate questioning of police methods with being anti-police. You certainly appreciate the support, but it doesn't need to be unconditional. The public can back law enforcement while at the same time bemoaning instances of corruption and abuse of power. Commentators on the left decry all stop and frisks as inherently unconstitutional, despite the existence of a seminal court case called Terry v. Ohio, which has been greenlighting such stops since 1968. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow claims on air that it's irrelevant that Michael Brown was shown committing what appears to be strong-armed robbery prior to his deadly encounter with Officer Wilson. I assert it's wholly relevant. It speaks to Brown's level of criminality and his probable belief that Officer Wilson was going to arrest him for that robbery, which could easily make Brown more prone to use violence against Wilson. Maddow should know better, because I figured that out, and I'm reasonably certain she's a lot smarter than me. When the news media run controversial police incidents, whether they be questionable uses of force or cops violating the previously mentioned "don't be a dick" rule, in a continual loop on air, it's all fair game. When you're in uniform, you subject yourself to intense scrutiny, and you are responsible for everything you do and everything you say. But it would be much appreciated if they also presented more counterbalance to the general public. Perhaps the station could run the clip of the cop saving a kid from choking in a restaurant, or the state trooper pulling a man out of a burning car, or any of the hundreds of meaningful, high-profile acts that police officers do every day. How about putting those in the regular rotation, too? Otherwise, it's like ESPN's highlight reel only showing the 50 shots the Celtics missed that game. When cops are being pilloried on every channel, you tend to hunker down in full defensive mode. You think the public doesn't get it, and they never will. But that can't be the end of the conversation. Both of us have much room for improvement. We both need to explain ourselves, apologize if we have done wrong, work on ways to reduce tension instead of amping it up. Because it's a partnership between the police and the community, and if one of us goes down hard, so does the other. But with all that being said about constructive dialogue and understanding and the like, you know that police work is a contact sport. It is, and will continue to be, a volatile business. There is always going to be a Ferguson. It will just be called something else. One of the many lessons of Ferguson was that if there's a high-profile incident like an officer-involved shooting, OIS, police departments need to front-load information as soon as they can without compromising the case. An OIS is a complex, multifaceted investigation where everyone from the DA's office to civilian watchdog agencies to internal affairs gets involved. The officers who fired their weapons will go through multiple interviews and are entitled to due process. But when it's appropriate to release the facts, they should be released. Because if you are too slow to do so, the public will invent their own narrative. Damaging speculation and misinformation will weave its way into the conversation. If you weren't there, of course, you don't know what happened. Even if you were there, You may not have seen everything the officer saw. That officer's testimony is the most critical piece of information to the case. For some people, it won't matter. All the videos and graphs and hard evidence in the world won't change their predetermined beliefs. But you have to try. That's why you're seeing departments nationwide releasing police body camera footage far earlier than they did in the past. It doesn't always answer all the public's questions because people want the simple story, and it isn't always simple out there. But it can go a long way toward keeping the peace. Those who claim there's an epidemic of police shootings would be wise to look at the actual statistics. For instance, a 5-year study of SF officer-involved shootings culminating in 2010 found that about 1 in 10,000 arrests resulted in a police-related shooting. 1 in 10,000. It's important to emphasize that we're talking actual arrests here, not mere citizen contacts or even detentions that don't lead to arrest. When you arrest someone, you're taking their liberty away, which always brings with it the prospect of violence. And ask any street cop with some time in, and he'll tell you about a host of times he could have justifiably used deadly force, but elected not to. That's why cops bristle when they see some protester screaming that the cops are indiscriminately shooting people as he holds up a sign that says, "It could be my son next." Sir, if your son comes at the police with a knife or a gun, then yes, God help him, he could be next. Otherwise, the 1 in 10,000 chance he has of being shot by the police is roughly the same risk he runs, according to the National Weather Service website, of being struck by lightning in his lifetime. The police are to uphold the sanctity of life whenever possible and must justify every bullet we fire. But when the public grossly overstates the problem, we all lose. In some people's minds, every time a white police officer has a negative encounter with a black suspect, racism is clearly afoot. It's a simple mathematical equation. White cop plus black suspect equals racism. What else could it possibly be? In this worldview, if Ferguson's Michael Brown had been white, Officer Wilson wouldn't have stopped him in the first place. Or if a white Michael Brown punched Officer Wilson in the face and went for his gun, Officer Wilson surely wouldn't have shot him, not over the misguided antics of a fellow Caucasian. To be sure, racism is threaded through every institution in our country, from mortgage lending to how kids are disciplined in school. Think tanks have put on several studies that feature a variation on this theme. 2 candidates, equally qualified on paper, are up for the same job. One has a traditionally white name, like Trevor. The other has a traditionally black name, like Darnell. It may not surprise you to learn that in these studies, Darnell doesn't get a lot of callbacks. And go into any courtroom in America, and you'll hear about the time a black defense attorney was confused with a defendant. That just doesn't happen with whites. What complicates such discussions is the documentation on how blacks commit a disproportionate amount of violent crime in this country. The DOJ reported that between 1980 and 2008, blacks committed more than half of all murders in the United States, while making up only 13% of the population. Alternatively, Uniform Crime Report, UCR, statistics show that when adjusted for population, blacks are roughly 4 times more likely than whites to be killed by the police. That's a deeply troubling figure. Also troubling are recent FBI crime stats, again adjusted for population, that show black men are 5 times more likely than white men to kill police officers. I'm no statistician. I got this data from Dr. Peter Moskos's December 14, 2014 entry to his thought-provoking blog, Cop in the Hood. Books and dissertations have been devoted to the study of this racial disparity, with socioeconomic factors no doubt playing a weighty role, but the disparity remains an uncomfortable one. It is also the case that somewhere right now in the United States, some variation on this scenario is occurring. A black person is sitting at a table across from his white neighbor and musing on the fact that he's been stopped by the police 7 times in the last 2 years. The white counterpart? 0. Both are good drivers who operate perfectly functional vehicles. Now, maybe the tendency for the white neighbor is to think the black neighbor is exaggerating. After all, it's pretty safe to say non-minorities tend to greatly underestimate the level of prejudice minorities experience. I'm no different. I heard a piece on NPR some time ago where a law-abiding African-American said he gets stressed when the police are behind him because he thinks they're going to kill him. As a cop, I heard this and my gut said, "What alarmist nonsense." But is my reaction fair? Whether his fear is reasonable is almost beside the point. If he feels that way, the police have a serious image problem. It's our issue as much as his. Moreover, you talk to black police officers who muse about being profiled by law enforcement both before and after becoming cops. If you don't listen to them, who are you going to listen to? All of that means something. It means that racial profiling is real and damaging. All of these perspectives need to be acknowledged in a serious conversation about law enforcement and race. But it seems to me that it's irresponsible to automatically assume a police encounter between a white cop and a black suspect is about race, and also to assume that it isn't. Like any important issue worth exploring, it's best to have some facts, or at least informed theories, before rushing to judgment. Did this particular officer let loose with a racial slur? Does he have a history of race-based complaints? Did he see both a white suspect and a black suspect commit precisely the same offense, and ignore the white guy and throw the black guy in cuffs? In the absence of something tangible like this, the community may wish to entertain the possibility that this cop is doing nothing more than going about his workday, and the race of the suspect doesn't play into it in the ways some people might expect. I come to this discussion with all my own biases. My natural allegiance is to the men and women in uniform whom I serve with and who inform my outlook in ways I am aware of, and probably in some ways that I'm not. I know that I am inherently resistant to the prospect of significant swaths of police departments being racist. I've heard another officer use the word nigger once in my police career, over a decade ago in Milwaukee. But the belief that police departments are racially prejudiced isn't some anachronistic notion that materialized out of thin air. History takes us from Bull Connor and his dogs and hoses in Birmingham in '64 to a deputy police chief in Florida named David Borst, found to be a member of the Ku Klux Klan as recently as 2014. SFPD's 2015 racially charged texting scandal, where multiple officers referred to blacks as monkeys and niggers and made white power references, left me both disgusted and reflective of whether I knew cops as well as I thought I did. Police can be tone-deaf to the effect their words and actions have in communities of color. We have a tendency to blunder down the block when we need to tread lightly, a tendency to pre-designate an entire community as bad. As criminologist David Kennedy rightly points out in his book, Don't Shoot, when there is a controversial incident in a black neighborhood, the police focus only on the incident, but the neighborhood focuses on the whole history of the police in that neighborhood. We need to recognize that and do better. But none of that makes it justifiable to cry police racism without any evidence to support that claim, because you're talking about what is in an officer's heart. Hard to know such things. I'm not trying to speak for the black community, and if it sounds like I am, I'm not as good of a writer as I hope to be. What I do know is that when accusations of police racism are well-founded, those offenders need to be aggressively rooted out in the same way you'd go after a particularly toxic virus. But if a police controversy is about race only because some people decide to arbitrarily make it about race, the damage that can be done is about much more than the boy who cried wolf syndrome. Accusations of racism are incendiary. And when the community makes such claims absent logic, discernment, and constructive dialogue, it can quickly lead to bedlam. And yet another city will burn. The perception that the police actively use racial profiling has the community up in arms, and rightly so, because as a cop, you are to focus on the behavior of people, not the color of their skin, in determining whom to stop and arrest. Equal enforcement of the law is a cornerstone of democracy. But this isn't quite as simple as it may appear. I'll use the racial demographics of my own city as an example. As it stands now, the majority of street-level drug dealers along the 6th Street corridor are black. The majority of the suspects selling stolen property at 7th and Market are Hispanic. The majority of the auto burglars in the area of 9th and Howard are white. Although there are some prickly types out there who will claim even a statement like this is racist, I know what criminal behavior looks like, and I have eyes that work. My partners and I have spent years in these areas, conducted surveillance operations there, made numerous arrests, and spoken with our co-workers who have had equivalent experiences. So we know how the demographics shake out. Now, if you have been tasked by your captain with putting a stop to the fencing operation at 7th and Market, and the last 10 guys you've arrested there for receiving stolen property are Hispanic males between the ages of 18 and 40, and here comes Hispanic guy number 11, 18 to 40, hanging out on the corner, can you automatically assume he's in the stolen goods game too? After all, the last 10 fellows who looked like him were. The answer is, of course, that you may not. The 11th guy shouldn't have to pay for the sins of the 10 guys prior who just happened to share the same skin tone. Could be he's as criminally culpable as the others, but you can't start with that. You have to give him a fresh slate. This is what fairness demands. But this is easy to say and harder to do. We see patterns and become used to them and must closely guard against them becoming self-fulfilling prophecies. Now, if the 11th guy is approached on that corner by someone who appears to be a stranger and starts closely examining this stranger's iPhone, and then currency covertly exchanges hands in an area notorious for fencing, now you're onto something. If your own mother did that, you'd jack her up and ask her some hard questions. Come to think of it, maybe we've gotten to the point in our society where this should be the new litmus test for police to avoid racial profiling. If you saw your mom do it, would you stop her too? The Eric Garner case on Staten Island is profoundly unsettling, but...
And that was the first half of Chapter 21 called Going Forward by Adam Plantinga and read by Steve Marvel. Back in a minute. Thank you. The following is one of my voiceover demos. If you're a voiceover artist and you would like to advertise one of your demos on my podcast, please send an MP3 to thedrill12, all one word, at gmail.com. That's thedrill12 at gmail.com. Back in a minute.
Americans love scenery. We want to see it all, from one coast to the next, Mount Rushmore down to the Everglades. So hop into a Chevy Malibu and take the scenic route. It's the car you knew America could build. There's a place where people count on friendships they can trace back generations, where they can count on the same stool at the coffee shop waiting for them every morning. This place is called Glen Ellen, and you can find it in every bottle of Glen Ellen wine. This is craft brewed Herman Joseph's, the smoothest, easiest drinking specialty beer in the entire solar system. And I believe you'll find drinkable in the dictionary right after don't order a beer you can't drink. Zoingo! Boingo! The freestyle pogo with more boing, more bounce. Bounce further, bounce higher with Zoingo Boingo. To see what makes Arrowhead Mountain Spring water different from those other waters, you have to go back to the source. And with Arrowhead, that means going back a little farther and longer than most. Between security challenged and security strengthened, there's one important word: how. And it is the how that makes all the difference to our nation and our world. Lockheed Martin. We never forget who we're working for. What makes Kraft Singles so good? 2 out of every 3 kids don't get the recommended amount of calcium. But with Kraft Singles, they get a good source of calcium and the taste they love. Kraft Singles. Magic every single time. Throw boring overboard with a new real meal from Long John Silver's. A meal worthy of a plate, just $4.99. Only at Long John Silver's. We may not all be geniuses, but we can all do something smart. Introducing the Hyundai 199 Sonata Lease. It's a smart deal on a really smart car.
This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.